you did your weird voice, and it sounded.
But I kept it on time.
But it sounded distorted. Like it distorted. It sounded robotic, so it confused me. So I
I'll
thought
distort you.
I'm gonna fucking murder you.
That's recorded.
Yeah, well, I'm fucked if you get murdered. Well, no, I've got an alibi. I'm in fucking Texas right now, so
That's true. All right.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. God, I need to stop laughing.
You blew it.
Okay, Tommy boy.
Oh my god. It's a silver alert.
What the fuck? Oh, it's an elderly person missing. Is that what a silver alert is?
Yeah.
Yeah, let them die. They had a good life.
Jesus Christ. That's recorded.
Shit, Texas is rubbing off on me. Now I feel like a celebrity during a bloopers reel. You got to compose yourself so you can go do another take. Thank you for listening to another episode of Ruin My... Fuck!
Aren't you hungry? Don't you want to get this over with?
I am. I'm starving.
Leave it all in.
Remake, rewind, blast from the past, does it stand the test of time? Remake, rewind.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Remake Rewind. I'm Mike, as always. With me, I've got my buddy Alex. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How you doing?
I'm out in the Lone Star State, recording live in Texas.
Arkansas. Oh.
That's the lone sibling state / father / uncle / also sibling. Ooh.
Don't alienate our southern
Our one
Midwestern.
That's all
Alabama's the South, right?
Yeah, it is the South, but you also said Arkansas.
Oh, I mean Arkansas. Arkansas is still the South.
Yes, it is. Anywho, what we're doing this week is we're celebrating not watching Morbius by covering the 1931 classic Dracula, and we're also covering the 1992 Bram Stoker's. Bram Stoker's. You say the name of the second movie.
Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
There you go. There you go. I haven't actually seen either of these movies before.
Oh, no shit.
I was really excited to watch both of these. I've actually, because of the podcast, I've gone and watched, a lot of older movies from the 30s and 40s, and have found an appreciation. Like when I was in middle school, high school, for whatever reason, I never really liked watching black and white movies. So this podcast has given me an outlet to, not force myself, but given me a reason to go back and watch some of these old movies and see where, cinema started. So I was really excited to go back and watch these. And I've also heard very mixed things about the Coppola version. I know Keanu has a terrible accent in it, but, I knew Gary Oldman it's Gary Oldman, so of course he's going to put in an amazing performance. So I was really excited to go and watch both of these movies. I assume you've watched both before.
I have not seen the original Dracula, surprising.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I think, kids all have an aversion to black and white films, or, kids our age or from a certain point on. So I didn't watch it when I was younger. And as I got older, it was just, kind of a blind spot. There's not a reason to watch it, and I didn't happen upon it. So that one kind of slipped by. I have seen Bram Stoker's. I actually watched it a few years ago, and I think I probably saw bits of it when I was younger, but I did like an intentional rewatch a few years back, and was like blown away by how good, how much fun it was. So I was really excited to rewatch it for this.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, it goes without saying, the 1931 version, it really shaped the modern interpretation of vampire to this day. You look at, Jared Leto, you look at the Twilight movies, it's because of him that we got the sexy vampires from, the old folklore. They were kind of like lich, kind of gross, monstrous kind of creatures beforehand. And this gave us the aristocratic, sophisticated, well-dressed, well-mannered kind of socialite vampire. So it's really interesting to see the start of it. But why don't you give me a summary of this one, man?
Oh man, I wasn't ready to give a summary. I should be.
Oh, I've got a fucking fantastic summary for the second one.
All right. Ugh. Caught me off guard. I'm a little brain foggy now. Dracula's about You gave me the giggles, man.
It's gonna be one of those episodes.
Yeah, it is. Dracula's about this fabulous guy who lives in Eastern Europe, and he decides to take a little vacation to England, buy a house while he's there, and as you can expect, he falls in love with the first British girl that he sees, and
Second
British girl that he sees, and tries to pick her up, and hijinks ensue, and it doesn't go so well for Drac.
No, it doesn't.
Do people not know the story of Dracula?
Honestly, I think people may have different versions in their mind because the original novel is really just a collection of like diary entries and newspaper articles and stuff like that, and it's been retold so many times, and like with different powers and different levels of sexiness and different levels of gore, that I think people do have. They might have some confusion as to like what the actual vampire Dracula stories could be.
I feel like it's well, actually, this is a good way to describe both these movies, right? Well, it feels like it's hard to like to either oversimplify it. It's like it's Dracula. It's
right.
He's doing Dracula shit, or overcomplicate it and try to like give every plot thread that exists in the book, which I think is what the 1992 one does.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing with this movie, it took me a little bit to watch it. So we have a shared account that we watch movies on for the podcast. I'm 2 hours ahead of him, and I didn't communicate with him. He was watching it, and so I had to stay up until like 1 a.m. to watch it. Totally
Luckily,
fell asleep.
it was a short movie.
Yeah, it's only an hour and 15 minutes, so
yeah.
Totally great. So I actually watched it over 2 different sessions because I totally fell asleep because it was 1 a.m. But then I rewatched it, and I can't remember which movie we were talking about where we brought up the importance of score. I think it was 3:10 to Yuma. But one older movie that you and I have talked about, we talked about how the new version, even if it kept everything the same and just added a score, it would have greatly added value to the movie.
Yeah.
This one was tricky because it's such an old movie that's been restored. There's actually scenes that are missing that got removed because of the Hays Code, because this came out technically after the Hays Code started, but before it was enforced. And so in subsequent re-releases, they actually cut certain scenes, and those scenes have been lost to time. But there's points in this movie where it gets a little grainy, and there's a lot of noise in the recording where there's a little bit of a staticky sound. So this one was, and I'm not saying this as a knock against it. I still enjoyed the movie, but I definitely missed having a score and music. Like the only music in the movie was the very beginning, and the song was called like The Mummy or something like that, which on the opening credits, which I thought was kind of funny.
The grainy noise thing, it's just like static. Like through the whole movie, it's just shh, it's like white noise.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's distracting, but it was also maddening because it feels like such an easy thing to remove. Like you do it for our podcast every episode.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
do.
It's possible. So that was a little distracting and a little bit of a bummer that they couldn't get rid of that for the version that we watched on Vudu. But the video, the audio, or visual quality was fantastic.
Fantastic for something. There's a few things where obviously over the course of almost 100 years, 90 years, that they've had to cut clips. That's what happens when you have to maintain a movie on film over, almost a century. As you do different versions, you end up having to cut frames because they get scratched. So there are a few things where it kind of jumps a few frames every once in a while. But on the whole, yeah, the video quality and the transfer was really good. So
yeah, there's a bunch of shots of Dracula doing his like glamming face or whatever. And that's a True Blood phrase, right? But his hypnotizing face where it's just like on Bela Lugosi, and he's doing one of these. Mike can see me.
Yeah, he's moving his eyebrows around and just having a really intense stare.
Yeah.
And
but it's a close up of Bela Lugosi's face, and all those shots look fantastic. I took a picture of one to post on my Instagram, and I was like, "Fuck, man, these look good. This is cool."
Well, what I found interesting, and I didn't realize it, was he actually only played Dracula twice in this, and then he also played it. He did the role very, very briefly in I think it was Frankenstein meets Abbott and Costello. Now, granted, he has played a bunch of different vampires that were basically Dracula, but they couldn't say Dracula for rights.
Right.
But I was actually really surprised that, because he is like, he kind of owns the role.
Yeah.
Still to this day, he's kind of considered the definitive version of Dracula.
Yeah.
And to find out, he only did the one movie. So I thought that was actually really interesting.
Yeah.
To find out that it was only one time as the titular character.
I will say, having grown up on Dracula Dead and loving it, and seeing that
Leslie
movie
Nielsen.
so many fucking times, there are a lot of, and that movie is such a good, or such a faithful,
Faithful
retelling
parody.
of this. Yeah, I mean, they're doing silly stuff, but like,
Is that Mel Brooks?
yeah, it is Mel Brooks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a parody. They're being silly, but I don't. It like circles back to just kind of being recreations of scenes from this movie.
As you were talking about it, the scene that just kept popping into my head was I can't remember the actor's name, but he's from Wings, and he's the
Shit.
I guess he's supposed to be Harker, but when he's killing Lucy, and he just keeps hammering her, and the blood just keeps spraying, and he just keeps doing it over and over again.
Yeah.
That's the scene that always pops into my head when talking about that movie. So one of the things, I guess I can do a very, very brief, real summary of the movie. Essentially, Dracula is deciding to go to London, so he has Renfield come to his house and figure out the paperwork so he can buy some land in London. He comes to London, he falls in love with Mina, or infatuated with her, after killing her best friend Lucy, and basically Harker, Dr. Seward, and then they bring in the ringer, Dr. Van Helsing, to take out Dracula, using all of his knowledge. And what I found really interesting about this movie, in comparison to, and we'll get into the new one, was I always thought that Renfield was the kind of the lead at the beginning of the movie, and then it goes to other people. The newer movie, it's Harker kind of takes the place of what Renfield does in this movie, and then Renfield has dual role, like he's the Renfield of this movie, and he plays the same part that he does in the newer movie as well, but plus he's like the protagonist at the beginning of the movie very, very briefly. So I thought that was interesting, and I guess that's actually more accurate to the book, is the newer version. So in my head, because I also am very familiar with Dracula Dead and loving it, where you start with Peter Nichols going to Transylvania and meeting Dracula, and he's Renfield. So for me, I was actually surprised with the newer one, but so I thought this version was like the way that it's supposed to be, and I thought this was the more accurate version. Man, was I wrong.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I had the Dead and Loving It version order of events in my head. So the new one threw me for a little bit of a loop, even though that is the more book accurate. Yeah.
What I really liked about this version was the amount of FaceTime. Like, there's not a ton, but Van Helsing has, some FaceTime with Dracula, and Dracula actually kind of fears Van Helsing. Like, there's a point where Dracula's talking, he's like, "Oh, Dr. Van Helsing, even in like the backwood countries of Transylvania where we're not as learned in science, we've heard of you." And then, he tries to flatter Van Helsing, and then later on in the movie they have a scene where they're like one-on-one in the room, they're just kind of talking, and Dracula tries to use his like hypnosis on Van Helsing, and Van Helsing just stares him down, and Dracula's like, "Oh fuck, my powers don't really work on this guy." And I thought that was really interesting, and that's not necessarily something that I've seen in other versions or recall. So I actually really liked that, and I liked how Van Helsing really was an expert. Like, he's talking about all the different powers, and it's, he's a man of science, but he's talking about it from a supernatural standpoint where he accepts both. And I feel like, and we'll get into the newer one, but I feel like the newer one was still very much of like a scientific approach to vampirism, where I kind of liked that this was a version that accepted supernatural weirdness.
Oh, I think the new version accepts supernatural weirdness, but I see where you're coming from. Yeah, I think both of these movies do a good job of making Dracula seem a lot more vulnerable than he/other vampires have in other contemporary media. I think a lot of the times vampires are like super strong and super fast, and a normal human has no chance against them, and blah, blah, blah. And I think that, like you said, Van Helsing has the willpower to resist Dracula's hypnosis or glamming or flattery or whatever. And I think in both of these movies, a normal person can either resist his charms or can like catch him during the day or whatever. It's a lot easier to deal with a vampire attack.
Yeah.
And he's the king of vampires, and it's a lot more interesting than them just being
I agree.
superhumans.
Yeah, because eventually it gets like the Van Helsing movie with Hugh Jackman, where he's just like a monster hunter, drastically different. You get a Dracula that's can only be defeated in the very specific circumstances, and you can walk on walls, and he's basically invulnerable. And that's kind of how vampires are nowadays. Is they're basically nigh invulnerable unless you find their
boring.
specific weakness.
Yeah,
I agree.
Like
so I actually really liked that, and I also liked the aristocratic nature of this guy, and he is charming, and that's what kind of created the quote unquote modern vampire. Nosferatu was really the first film vampire, and popularized vampires, but this version of Dracula is what kind of created the modern vampire of not being gross and grotesque and being somebody that you can see women falling for and getting to a point where he can get close and bite them in the neck and infect them and whatnot. So I really bought that all the women, even though he's an older guy and he's not necessarily the most handsome man, but I understood, I saw the charm in him, and I understood why the women in both versions were enamored by him, and he could get close to him.
Yeah, absolutely. They really glossed over Lucy's death in the.
Oh, I totally forgot about it for a second. Like I mentioned, I fell asleep because I was watching it late, and then when I was going through it, it just seemed like, oh yeah, they just killed her, and that was it. Like there was no real anything to it, where it's a much bigger deal than the other one. The focus on this one was really a lot more on Dracula and all of his powers. Like they go out of their way to explain all the powers. And I got to give, credit to it, like from a special effects standpoint from 1931, like this is really impressive. And there's a lot of, what is it called? Like a Texas switch when like the camera pans and then it comes back, or it's a cowboy switch or something like that. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff like that when like, he's a bat, and then the camera will pan out to the window so you can see the moon or something. Then it pans back, and he's just there because obviously they can't show him transform from a bat into a human. But it was very effective for that time period.
The bats were so funny though; like it's clearly like a rubber bat hanging from a string that somebody's
just shaking up and down for a very long time. At certain points, where there were points where there's just a bat hanging out in a doorway for conservatively 20 seconds, just shaking up and down.
Yeah,
not
didn't even
really
try to
moving
hide
or
it.
anything. No. But there's what's also interesting about this is, it's 1931. So, they're not as graphic as things. So, whenever he would go to bite somebody's neck, it would like pan away, or he would dip the person out of frame and you just kind of see his back. Or when he gets killed at the end of the movie, you see Van Helsing like wind up like he's going to, drive the stake. And then it pans over to Harker and Mina. And then you just hear Dracula like, ugh.
Yeah, it's like a very abrupt end to the movie. He just like dies off screen. They're like, well, Dracula died. Dracula had to go back to his home planet.
Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, and I never picked up on this because he you're the Italian, so I'm gonna let you say his name because I'm gonna butcher it. Bela Lugosi. Yeah, he's been a vampire in other things, and I've always seen him like in coffins and whatnot. And you see Dracula dead and loving in the coffin. I never knew that part of the lore was that it's not just being in the coffin during the day. Like I always thought it was sleeping in the day, but no, he has to actually sleep on Transylvanian soil, or he can die and lose his powers. I had no idea that was.
Yeah, and I think that's way cooler than what's become like the mainstream interpretation, which is just sleeping in a coffin during the day. And both of these movies do that, though. Both these movies have Dracula sleeping in dirt.
Yeah, I think that was a really cool thing that I kind of think that's a better way to keep it around, and the weakness that they could keep in newer versions of this, which, I mean, we just had a Dracula TV series that's set in the modern day from Stephen Moffat, who did, the newer Doctor Who seasons and the Sherlock Holmes show. So, I haven't seen it. I heard it wasn't very good. We're going to get another Dracula someday, but I think that would be an interesting thing to bring back.
We're not talking about all the other official Dracula movies that happened in between these two movies. Like there was one in I think 58. There's like 3 or 4 between the two that we're talking about, and since then there's also been Dracula 2000, Dracula Untold.
Yeah,
So,
Dracula
like,
Untold.
They make them
prequel
every
one.
15 years or so.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're gonna be overdue for like a true classical vampire movie. Like I just feel like we're due for one eventually, and I would like to see that weakness come back.
Yeah.
There's not really much I had to say about this movie. It's either something that you've seen before and you like it, or you appreciate it for what it is. I appreciate how it changed cinema. By today's standards, it is very, very hokey, but it worked for the time, and I see why
I think
that
it was
version
still
was prevalent.
the hokiness, quote unquote, like didn't it distracted me a little bit, but it didn't make it unenjoyable. I still had a good time watching it.
I absolutely agree. I think this is a movie that anybody who's into film should watch at least once, because it was really informative for me to see where things came from and where some of the tropes came from, and I thought that was a really great experience.
I think it's a really good example of how transcendent a good performance is, because Bela Lugosi is I don't want to say taking it seriously. He's in the role. He's taking it seriously in that sense. Like he knows that he's in a vampire movie, but like he's Dracula, and that's why his version of the character is held up for so long. And it still works. The scenes that I'm talking about where he's just staring at the camera, or like just off camera, but it's just a close up of him for like 15 seconds, still totally works. I love watching it. At no point did I feel goofy.
Well, and he's also the person who basically invented the Transylvanian accent that we still have to this day, that the Count on Sesame Street has. And in the novel it just says he speaks very good English with a slight accent. He had to decide what it was going to be, because it's not a Romanian accent by any stretch of the imagination. It's supposed to be in kind of an isolated region in Romania. So I kind of he created that, and even that accent is still being used in modern interpretations of the characters or parodies and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's great. And I do have to say the one thing that I thought was really funny and cool, like it just works, was when he's crossing the ocean or whatever he's crossing, how he gets to London, but you just see like that ship is like, it looks like it's just a flat ship, like right on the water, because the water is just flying over the edge like it's nothing. You just see like the crew members on the ship just getting beat to shit by the waves, but it looked really cool. Like even though I know it was a giant flat ship, it worked for me, because I'm just like, yep, that looks like a storm, and these poor actors are getting this shit beat out of them with water. But I'm like, yep, no, that looks real. I
really like I really like the set design of the lair as well. I wanted to say that.
I did too. Like, I really like the underground lair where it's all decrepit and everything, because he says something along the lines of like, oh, it would take me way too long to. Like, he didn't want to do repairs, and it would take him way too long to take a newer home and make it comparable to what he's used to, because he wanted something old and gross and disgusting, and it worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. You ready to move on to our next segment before we talk about the modern classic?
Let's do it.
All right, man. What have you been up to, bud?
Well, sir, I rewatched The Disaster Artist, which I guess is something I do every 6 months now. It's still great.
Solid movie.
Yeah, love that. I think I have a reason to bring it up later too. I watched Jackass Forever for the first time.
Me too.
That was so good, man.
I literally finished it right before we started recording, because
hell yeah.
started it this morning and I had like 10 minutes left, so I was like watching it as I was setting up my gear. So I literally finished it like 30 seconds before I sent the invite for the meeting to you.
Yeah, it's so much fun. We Scarlett and I saw Rachel Wolfson perform comedy like a month or so ago, and she's pretty funny. Nice. Yeah, maybe we can have her on the podcast at some time.
Let's do it. Let's try it.
Yeah, Rachel, come on the podcast. Rewatched The Other Guys, Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg.
I almost watched that last night.
I'm really curious what you think upon rewatch, because I have some thoughts that I haven't
didn't
had
like it when it came out, so I've like haven't been rewatching it. I was just so bored last night, and it was like a 90-minute movie, and I'm like, if I watch this, it'll end right around 12:30. Good time to go to bed. And then I decided to watch something else instead, but maybe I'll watch it for you.
I've seen it, at least five times, probably closer to 10. And I really enjoy it. There's like a lot of memorable bits for me. But this time watching, I was like, man, this really like misogynistic movie. Like I kind of
Yeah, that was the big thing I didn't like about it at the time.
Yeah, for whatever reason, it didn't like register as that when I saw it initially. But this time around, it was hard to ignore. And we watched Ty West's X.
God, I want to see that. It looks so good.
It's really good. Yeah, I think he killed it. And Ty West is like one of my favorite horror filmmakers, and he's not been making films for a few years. So this is a really cool return to form for him.
I'm out in Texas. I got in, early afternoon on Sunday, so I had some time to kill. So I went and saw Ambulance, Michael Bay's new film.
Yeah.
Hated it.
Really? Fuck.
Yeah. It seriously could have, like, the plot, they stretched it so much. Like, it could have been a single episode, like an hour-long procedural.
I'm not going to Michael Bay movies for plot.
No. But I mean, it's so, like, it literally is. It's a 2.5 hour movie, and 2 hours of it is literally them just driving around in the ambulance, and it's not even that interesting. And Bay's signature, like when two people are talking, the camera's like rotating around them, and they also kind of spin around as they're talking. There was a scene that was like a 10-minute dialogue scene where like the camera did not stop spinning around. I got nauseous, and I don't normally get nauseous in movies, but I almost got up to leave because I'm like, if this whole movie is going to be this, I'm out. And every time he would come back and do it again, he would do it just long enough where I'm going to be like, this is awful, I'm going to leave. I stuck out the movie, but the action wasn't even all that interesting. Like, all the coolest stuff was in the trailer. Like, the trailer is enough to watch.
Well, I'm going to go see it this week. I feel like I have to see that on the big screen.
Yeah, I don't know. And the main reason I went to see it was because Yaya, because, the Candyman, like, he crushed Candyman. He's crushed everything he's been in. So I'm like, well, if he's in it, and I like Jake Gyllenhaal, and Itza Gonzalez is, my crush. So I was like, I'm going to give it a shot. And I didn't like it. Saw Everything Everywhere All at Once. One of the easily in my top 10 favorite movies now.
Yeah,
like,
that's awesome.
It's insane.
Heard nothing but good things.
I watched The Mitchells versus the Machines on my airplane trip.
Yeah.
It was fun. I don't think it's as good as the internet said it was, but
I enjoyed it.
I laughed throughout, but it wasn't perfect. I already mentioned Jackass Forever. We finished Raised by Wolves. I also finished 30 Rock, and I saw Master Chief's ass. 21 years of not seeing his face in video games. In episode 3 of Halo, you see him naked. Haven't watched episode 4 yet, but that was interesting. That was a bold choice.
Yeah, I want to watch that show, but I keep on hearing things that make me not want to watch it.
Like, I'm torn because, like,
not there's anything
my
wrong
biggest
with the
issue,
little ass, but
yeah, no, it's not. Like, I was torn because, like, the opening was really strong. Like, you just see all these elites dropping down and they're shooting at these people. They're like blowing up. I'm like, oh shit, this is cool. But there was only like 5 or 6 people, so they can have the budget blowing up. And then all of a sudden they show up in a town with 150 people, and the same guns all of a sudden are just shooting sparks when they hit people. So it's like, they're not being consistent with what the weapons can do, and I'm totally cool with them changing the lore. They said from the very beginning it's not going to be the same lore as the game, but it's dragging. So we'll see. Yeah. If I were you, I'd wait until it's done, and then just watch it at your leisure versus wait. It's not good enough to wait week by week.
Yeah.
Oh, and Moon Knight. I've been watching Moon Knight, of course. Oh yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed.
That goes
Moon
without
Knight.
saying.
So I think I'm just double checking my number here. Ambulance's budget was $40 million, which is like so low.
That's small for him. Yeah.
I mean, small,
I would believe
small
it. Like,
for any action movie that comes out these days, especially the guy that did Transformers.
Most of the movie was just them in the ambulance, so there's not a ton of sets. Like, there's basically...
Yeah, but it's like huge action explosions and shit, right?
So there's like 3 sets, 3 locations, and then most of it's in the van or the ambulance, and then of course they're blowing stuff up. But
there's something else that's got a $40 million budget that just came out recently. I can't remember what it is.
I'm happy. That would actually make me really happy to start seeing budgets shrink, because I mean, you go back to even right when movies started to cost $200 million fairly regularly. You had District 9 that came out at $35 million. It looked better than a lot of the $200 million movies. So, and then you also saw like Deadpool. The first Deadpool movie was only like a $60 million movie. So it's like, you can make good movies on a budget if you're smart. Like, you don't have to throw, and we've been talking about it with all the Marvel movies recently. Like, Shang-Chi had some pretty janky CGI. Now, granted, it was filmed during the pandemic and whatnot, so you have to give it a little bit of an asterisk. But when you're spending $220 million on a movie, it should look good.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bigger conversation, but it, creates all sorts of other issues when every movie costs $200 million and it has to make that money back.
Yeah. You ready to talk about Bram Stoker's Dracula? I can synopsize it.
Did you say Stroker?
Yeah, I did.
Well, that's not the right.
I did it on purpose. I was thinking if you'd catch it.
I caught it.
Good.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So this is a prequel to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. You've got.
I'm already not into this.
You've got Neo, Robin Hood, the Rocketeer, and Odin / Hannibal Lecter, all hunting Dracula. No, I mean, it's basically the unabridged version. You have Vlad the Impaler. So this one really leans into the idea that this was based off the real guy, Vlad the Impaler, who was the prince of the Transylvania region of Romania. He was he fought in the Ottoman War. He was a hero, but somebody told his wife that he died, so his wife killed himself. So he gets back from fighting this war, and he's just like, what the fuck, God? Like, I've been like one of your holy warriors, and you do this. So he denounces God, stabs a crucifix statue, blood pours out, and he becomes the Dracula that we know and love. And he also needs to go to London and buy a bunch of property. But this version's a little bit different. You have Winona Ryder playing Mina, and Mina is actually the reincarnated version of his wife, and he's trying to get with her. And in this version, John Harker, played by Keanu, is the guy who goes to Transylvania at the beginning of the movie. In this version, he actually gets captured and is kept at the castle because he's using him as like an English tutor to teach him about English society. And then he leaves him there to be like a plaything for his wives. And then Dracula goes and does his thing, eventually kills enough people to get noticed, and they assemble the crew to go and kill him. Well, that's the movie.
Yeah, that's basically what happens.
Yeah.
So let's just get this out of the way right up top. Keanu, probably miscast in this. Not fantastic.
Well, you know why he was cast? So I read an interview. So Coppola didn't learn from his just the year prior doing Godfather 3 that, maybe cast good actors. But he actually said he cast Keanu because at that time he had just done, Point Break. He had been doing the Bill and Ted movies. He wanted to get teenagers into the theater. So he hired him and Winona to get teenagers and young people into the theaters.
Yeah, so that's true, and I think there's a little bit more background to that. His company, American Zoetrope, which San Francisco Bay Area natives, what's up, guys, was not doing super well at the time, and he needed to make money for his film company, so they didn't go under. So that's why he ended up doing Godfather Part 3, and then this came out, 2 years later or whatever.
A year later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get a bunch of hot, sexy young actors to make sure that kids get in there. You want it to be a 4-quadrant movie as much as possible. And Winona was actually supposed to be Sofia Coppola's role in Godfather 3. And
that probably would have been better.
Yeah, well, anything would have been better. But he stayed in touch with Winona, and she ended up being in this.
That's good.
Yeah.
This movie, and the Keanu thing, his accent, apparently he went to a dialect coach and he really worked on it. But apparently what Coppola said about it was he never really gave direction to Keanu. Apparently Keanu wanted it to be so perfect that it was just a very stiff, stifled performance. There's no nuance to his performance at all.
Yeah, he's just miscast. Like, I don't think if he gave his best, it still would have stuck out. And he also gave an interview where he talked about how tired he was at that time because he'd come off of like shooting 3 movies back to back or something.
Yeah, he was super busy back then.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as bad as I thought. Like, I've been hearing for 30 years how terrible Keanu was in this movie.
It's fine.
Honestly, it's a typical Keanu movie when he does a dramatic role. Like, Keanu, over the last 20 years since that movie, 30 years since the movie come out, but over the last, 15 years, he's recognized the type of characters he can play convincingly, and he's done much better job at picking his roles in the last 15 years or so.
Yeah.
And I think that's fair. I think a lot of actors need to be more self-aware of the range that they have
Sure.
and stick to movies in that range. So I appreciate that he does that now. But honestly, it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I don't. He's probably the worst part of the movie, but also like he's not terrible. He's not in half the movie, so it's not a big deal. I
Yeah.
will say, watching this, I realized that in Disaster Artist, there's that scene where they go get pizza, and Tommy has what's his name, Greg, act out the Shakespeare play or whatever, like in the middle of the restaurant. Do you know what scene I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, the way James Franco reads that Shakespeare scene is exactly like almost all of Keanu's performance in this movie.
I don't think that's fair.
Whether
but
'tis nobler, or it's completely understated, like I've offended you.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
So now
I
we're
do
not
have
going to
this-
talk about Keanu for the rest of the
No,
thing.
Keanu, like, no.
I
That's
feel like
it.
it's not worth talking about.
Gary Oldman, I mean, you expect a good performance out of him, no
Yeah.
matter.
He's
the
so
age.
good though, man. He's like
I feel-
unhinged.
So bad for him because he's in prosthetics in literally every scene. Even his young version, he's got, his forehead, tightened a little bit, the wigs and the makeup and the beard and everything. And then of various degrees of being like old and gross and decrepit. And then he's got his werewolf version and his bat version. It's poor guy. That
All
was
of
not
the-
an easy shoot.
All of the monster suits are so fucking good though.
Even his like weird armor at the beginning was cool. It's like, it just looked like his armor basically looked like musculature, like
I love
they
that
skinned
armor.
somebody. It
So-
makes no sense, but it looked really cool.
So the person that they hired to do the costume design, who won an Oscar by the way, is Aiko Ashoka and Ishioka, and he had never seen any Dracula movies or anything. Like he was not familiar with the character. So he comes in and just like does all these costumes that have nothing to do with our preconceptions of Dracula. I think he fucking killed it. They're so good.
I forgot. I didn't mention in the last one, but I forgot. I had no idea that Dracula could also turn into a wolf creature.
Yeah, pretty
And
cool.
they looked all the costumes, all the the makeup, everything looked really good. There's not a ton of like special effects. There's a few things where like they'll drop severed heads down a chasm and whatnot, and that didn't look any worse than things looked at that time. Like this movie looks really good.
I think it's one of the coolest things about this movie, and that also excuses a little bit of what you're talking about, is that it's blending tropes like visual filmmaking techniques and also just costuming ideas and stuff from so many different time periods. There's in-camera special effects techniques that that were very prominent in like the 70s and also the 30s right next to each other. And I think the costuming is very effective for that same reason. It's just this like pastiche of all these different time periods. And I think it makes it fucking cool. And I know exactly what you're talking about with the heads falling down the chasm. And, that's a thing that was prevalent in, that was the thing that happened at a certain period of time and didn't bother me.
No, I mean that's like the only thing that doesn't really hold up by today's standards is very, very few visual effects shots.
Yeah.
Honestly, the only thing, and this is I've said it before, I've said it with you on the podcast, I've said it on other episodes. Like, I think I'm going to preface it: The Godfather is an amazing film, but I have said in the past that like I don't think it's sacrilegious to say that it could be remade, because Coppola does make a lot of and it's not just him, he's got his script supervisor who should be taking care of this stuff too, but there are quite often a lot of goofs in his movies. Like in this movie, like one of the scenes where Keanu is with the 3 vampire wives, like literally then like a 3-second period you see him with the shirt on, with the shirt off, with boots on, with boots off, like boom 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 boom, and I caught it and it took me away. And then like in the scene where he's kind of Dracula's with Winona Ryder and she's falling for him because she's remembering her past lives memories, you actually see modern red panties on, and it's just like there's all these things that like I just caught. And so it bums me out because Coppola's supposed to be this masterful people, and I think people give him too much. Like there's things like that in The Godfather. There's things where you can see the set shaking. There's things where the audio is not great, and so it's like Coppola gets a lot of slack And I don't think he's ever made and there's no such thing as a perfect film. Every film has some, slight goof or something didn't get set properly. But I feel like Coppola actually has quite a bit, and nobody ever really calls out his movies for having those issues.
Until you.
Yep. I'm going to put it out there.
Well, listen, you and I have disagreed about this in the past and will continue to. And I want to be on record as saying that I don't think that The Godfather should be remade. But
I'm not saying it should be, but I'm saying I don't think it is the worst thing in the world for it to be remade, because I don't think it's a perfect movie like everyone says it is. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
I said it wouldn't be sacrilege to remake it.
Oh,
I'm not saying it necessarily should be remade, but I'm saying like so many people are like, it's a perfect movie, it should never be touched. If somebody wanted to do it, that would be a very risky move for their career. But I don't think the movie's as perfect as people say it is. That's my point.
Okay. That's some kind of point. What else do you like in this movie? It was a lot punnier than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
There were some good puns in the beginning.
There's some good puns. I liked the weird shadow stuff that, Gary Oldman's Dracula, who'll be talking to somebody.
Oh, yeah, the movie.
Yeah, he'll be talking to somebody,
absolutely.
and he'll be playing very cordial and very nice, but he's obviously very annoyed with the character, and you'll see like his shadow like creep out and like choke a character and kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
That's a big
I like
Dracula.
things like that.
That's a big Dracula done loving it parody. It's hard not to think about the shadow, Leslie Nielsen's shadow being goofy in that movie, but it's still so effective in this one.
Yeah,
I thought you were going to mention
really
the shadow puppets in the introduction.
I liked those too.
I love it. It's great.
Yeah.
That whole like intro, the opening, I guess prologue, setting up who Dracula is and how he came to be, how he is a vampire, and why he denounces religion is so fucking cool and so fucking well done.
I agree. I thought that was really effective. One of the other things, I really like Tom Waits as Renfield in this. It's just really gross. And I like that this version was locked up, because like in the original version, Renfield is kind of like is able to come and go from his cell whenever. He's like, hey, Dr. Seward, I think Dracula's coming. And it's just like, they're like, go back to your cell. It's almost like Kramer, like, get out of here, Kramer. Like when they don't want him in Jerry's apartment anymore. In this version, like he's very unhinged. Everyone thinks he's really unhinged. I also thought, I don't know if this was on purpose or not, but I also thought this Renfield kind of looked a lot like Van Helsing in the original version, just like a disheveled, dirty Van Helsing.
Yeah, you're right. I see that. The glasses too.
Yeah, and the hairstyle, everything. Yeah. I thought that was really, really interesting.
I really liked watching Richard E. Grant and Tom Waits like choose scenery together.
Yeah, they were great.
First scene where the two of them talk.
I forgot to say Loki was part of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Sorry, you just mentioned Richard E. Grant. That just popped in my head. But yeah, go ahead.
There's that first scene where they talk to each other, and they're just like trying to one up each other with like overacting, but it works in the context.
It absolutely works, because one guy's supposed to be crazy, like absolutely unhinged, and then you've got the doctor who is.
But like Dr. Seward, you run a place like that, you got to have a screw loose. There's guys walking around with boxes on their heads. It's basically a big sewer.
Yeah, the guys on their heads are supposed to be like the orderlies. Like, is that for their protection? Like,
I don't know.
I've never seen anything like that.
I'm okay with it. It's cool. Yeah, but like, it's so fucking weird.
I knew immediately, because they're the ones who, like, when somebody's acting up, they go and grab him. So I'm like, okay, so those are definitely the orderlies. But yeah, why do they have these big old boxes on their heads? But whatever.
Why does Dracula go to London? Why does he buy Carfax Abbey in the first place?
I think it's because he was looking for Mina.
So I think in the book, her like soul calls out to him or something, but I don't feel like that's in either of the movies.
No, it's definitely not in either of the movies. And what's interesting about this one is he's actually buying more than just that property. So that's the main property that he's going to live in, but he's actually buying a bunch of properties.
Yeah, I kind of wish we got a little bit more of an explanation of why he went there. Maybe I missed it though.
Yeah, I think that's what it is, and I think it was supposed to be more implied than anything. The Lucy stuff is much more prevalent in this one.
Oh, so the Lucy thing is a good example of what I was talking about with sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all good.
So the Lucy some of the elements of the Lucy storyline are what I was talking about with like blending different time periods of filmmaking and stuff. Like he's doing all this gothic drama and blah blah blah. But the Lucy, like specifically Lucy having sex with the werewolf. The werewolf-esque Dracula is very like exploitation. It's very like 70s, and the orgy scene too with Keanu.
Yeah, there's a couple of things like that where it's like that reminded me of like the opening scene of, I think it's Howling 2, when there's just like a sex scene in a tent at the beginning, then the werewolf comes and like attacks like while people are having sex.
Yeah,
like it's just like it was very gratuitous and whatnot. Even like when the last time that Dracula bites Lucy, they like come running in and he disappears and you just see like Lucy in her bed with her like tits out of her gown. And I'm like, this is like kind of gratuitous. And then like Van Helsing comes and he's like trying to like save her. And then Carrie Elways comes in and he's just like, what are you doing? And Dr. Seward's like, dude, this is like my mentor. Like he's an expert on vampires. He's trying to save her. And then he's just like, you give me your blood. We need to do transfusions. And it's just like, I guess you could just take anybody's blood and put it in anybody. Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple scientific things in here that I'm not totally sure were correct. When we first meet Van Helsing, he's in the lecture hall and he's giving some speech. I didn't write it down, but it was like not scientifically accurate.
Yeah, I mean, like it's okay to not be scientifically accurate because the history, they didn't know as much.
No, but it was
then,
like what he said was nonsense. It was along the lines of like, you can put fucking dog blood into a fish and they'll stay alive.
Oh yeah, that's not true. That's bullshit, Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, that's not what he said specifically, but it was that ridiculous.
Right. So the thing that I didn't like about this movie was they introduced the three suitors. So you had Dr. Stewart was a suitor for Lucy. You had, I don't remember any of the names, but you had the Carrie Elways, and then you had the guy who played the Rocketeer.
Bill something.
Yeah, Billy Campbell.
Yeah.
But they're all in this movie, and like they're just kind of introduced, and then they're all just like, we're really good friends, and we're gonna help take out this vampire. Like they're all just like immediately like they're all in the same room at like one of the party scenes, and like there's no like animosity between them, or they're all just kind of chummy and whatnot, and they're like totally cool with the fact that like, and Carrie Elways' character is actually engaged to Lucy, and they're all still kind of like flirting with Lucy
because they love her so much.
They all love her so much that they're all kind of cool with just like this, which is not how it would have been. But then like even after like she dies, they have to decapitate her, and like Van Helsing makes them help. So like one of them's holding the stake, one of them's hitting the stake, and then the other has to decapitate the love of their lives. But yeah, that scene's like really effective because you have these three men that like love this woman, and they're responsible for killing or putting her out of her misery, however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty brutal and fucked up. And then they go on like a cross country like tour with Jonathan Harker to like find the plots of dirt, and then go fight a bunch of gypsies, and then like
one of them dies.
The Rocketeer gets stabbed in the back and just dies. And they're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it's weird. It's it feels like fantasy, right? Because I'm no historian, but I don't think that men who are in love with the same women become best friends. You know what I mean? But it's like, no. I don't know. It's kind of like, it becomes like it's like fantasy. Like it's kind of fun. Kind of like romantic with air quotes. But also it's a little weird because it feels like they treat her like it's good sportsmanship almost. Like, all right, well, you won, but we're all still good guys, But then like winning her love is like a sport, and that becomes kind of weird and misogynistic.
But I did like at the end of the movie when they're like, okay, this crew is going over to the castle to try to take out Dracula, and these people are going to go and get the final urn or whatever with the dirt, and then they all converge on the castle, and then they kind of have this like fight scene, and they're all like, it's four dudes who are all classy gentlemen, like one of them's an American. I would imagine he would be able to fight. That's Billy Campbell's character. But they all kind of like give what would be a killing blow to a normal human to Dracula. And then Dracula's like, well, I'm pretty much dead. And then Winona Ryder's like, hey guys, I'll finish it off. And Keanu's like, hey guys, our part's done.
Yeah. The ending of the last 5 minutes of this movie were a little, not the best for me.
Yeah. Well, and that was another just to bang my drum.
I do really
okay.
like Dracula bursting out of the box of dirt. That's
Yeah.
a very effective moment.
Very effective. And then stabbing the guy in the back. Really good. Keanu's hair.
Yeah,
Like
not great.
I like that. I understand why it went gray. Makes sense.
But they like sprayed it on.
Yeah. What I didn't like, and this is another one of these examples of like continuity not being great, is I noticed it was a very subtle gray initially, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then when they walk in on her getting bitten by Dracula, then it's like completely white, and it's like high school play, like they quality white hair.
I think they should have just put him in a white wig when he returned from Transylvania.
The next scene, it's dark. It's not back to where it was, but like the next scene, it's dark again, darker with some gray, and then it's back to being all gray. Like his hair color is swinging back and forth throughout the ending of the movie, and that's just like, it's little things like that keep me like from thinking that this could have been a masterpiece. And this movie is very well done, very well acted. We've already talked about how great the special effects are, how most of them still stand up 30 years later, and it's just like little things like this. It's just like, it's such a simple thing. Just like buy 3 wigs of the colors that you need and just make sure he's wearing the same wig after certain points in time. And I know they don't film movies chronologically, but I feel like it's such a simple thing to be able to make sure he's wearing the right colored wig or the right colored gray.
Yeah, I mean, I think story-wise, it would even just make more sense for him to go white while he's in Transylvania, and then he's just white-haired for the rest of the movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
We didn't talk about the soundtrack.
You know, honestly,
the soundtrack.
I didn't notice it,
love it.
I think honestly that is a symbol of a good score, because a good score should elevate the movie, but it shouldn't take away from it to an extent.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, like the Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix one, there are times where I'm like, this movie isn't very good. This shit doesn't make sense, but why is this scene so effective? And then I immediately get pulled out of them because the score is so fucking good. So there are times where I think it's a good thing to not necessarily notice the score. I think a really good composer is able to elevate the scene without necessarily drawing attention. And like, I almost said Baz Luhrmann, Hans Zimmer, I think is a fantastic composer, and he's done so many amazing movies, but there are times where like his stuff takes me out because it's so dynamic. And yes, it technically works with the scene, but it's always just like, and then you're just like, oh shit, something's about to go down, and it kind of takes you out. So I think having a subtle score works for me. I didn't notice it, but I think that's probably because it was good.
Yeah, I wouldn't describe this one as being subtle, but I take your point, and I really like this score.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I didn't even notice.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Apparently,
yeah.
I love all the shots of Dracula in the box of dirt. By the way,
yeah, very.
There's
good.
I think they do it like 3 times. There's a very specific or like a repeated shot where he's just like in dirt and he's like thinking, or he's like dripping blood from his mouth or something.
Yeah.
I think they're funny, but I also just love them.
I feel so bad. Once again, feel so bad for the amount of prosthetics he had to be in, and it was like, in any given scene, like, because like the way this worked is like if he used one of his powers or whatever, he would kind of revert to being old again, and like he could go out in the daylight, but he loses most of his powers, which I thought was another interesting thing, because that's the thing that's gone away from vampire movies. Like most modern vampire movies can't go outside, or to get around it in Twilight. It immediately
turns them to ash.
They burn away, or they have the diamond sparkly skin in the Twilight movies, whatever.
Well, this movie like kicks off a resurgence of classic horror characters and stuff. You get Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. A couple of years later, Wolf with Jack Nicholson sort of reimagines the Wolfman story. And then you also get Interview with a Vampire in 95, I think.
94 or 95, yeah.
Yeah, just a few years later. And that movie is the one that was like really hammering home, like if vampires get touched by a single ray of light, they turn to ash, and it's gruesome, and it happens immediately, and there's no way to undo it or whatever. And it's in like stark contrast to this movie. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And that I do think that's incredibly interesting. But like what I thought was fascinating was like every time he kind of used his powers, like I just watched Stardust, I brought up the last episode, and like every time Michelle Pfeiffer uses her magic, she gets a little older. And it was kind of like that. Like if he used, one of his spells, or if he had to exert himself, he immediately ages quite a bit. Yeah. And I was just like, there are scenes where he's like, young, handsome Gary Oldman, and then like he does something and like he's slightly grotesque, and then all of a sudden he's the Bat, and so it's like obviously they're not filming all those things back to back to back, but it's like fascinating in like one scene where he may have 3 or 4 transformations in like 2 to 3 minutes of movie time.
Yeah.
Like I don't even like logistically, I can't even imagine how crazy it was to film this movie and go, okay, we're going to film all the grotesque ones. Oh, we're going to film the bat scenes. We're going to film the wolf scenes, you know, in this week. Like, I just feel like this movie was a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, probably.
But I mean, I don't really have much more to say about it. Like, we kind of got our nitpicks out at the beginning, and then, you know, they were fairly mild. You know, at the end of the movie, like I said, Winona's the one who gets to kill him, and then both movies, when Dracula dies, they go back to being human, which is interesting. And that's not a thing that people don't care about.
Yeah, I didn't love the end of this movie. I don't like Dracula like finding God, kind of. I think that's a me thing, but it just didn't really work for me.
Was it him finding God, or was it him forgiving himself? I mean, the statue healed, which was a little weird.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at. Like, or he makes peace with God or something.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think. Oh, this one was actually really interesting. I thought visually it was really interesting when they kill Lucy. They decapitate her, and you see the blood, and you see like the stub of her neck, and then it immediately hard cuts to a really bloody, like, prime rib pot roast. And
one of my favorite cuts of the movie.
Yeah,
so good.
It's just really gross. And then like I also like that Van Helsing kind of like Harker is being kind of a sarcastic son of a bitch, and then Van Helsing's like, yeah, you totally fucked 3 vampire women over and over again. Like, what about your infidelity? And like Harker's like, okay.
Yeah, Anthony Hopkins is so good in this.
He killed it in this one. Yeah. I wish he had more time with Gary Oldman.
About that scene, by the way, he says, during your infidelity, did you ever taste any of the vampire blood or anything? And I was like, I think Van Helsing absolutely got Lucy blood in his mouth at some point. Like, he stabs her in the heart, and she vomits blood into his face.
Yeah, there's no way.
You definitely tasted it, man. You got infected.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's a minor nitpick.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm just going through.
I like when Dracula changes from the bat to a bunch of rats. Like, he goes into the dark and changes into rats, and his eyes are, like, red and piercing the whole time. That was really effective.
Yeah. No, that was a pretty cool scene. Like, all in all. Like...
sorry. I love in this movie that there are 2 scenes where we see vampires eating or attempting to eat toddlers or babies.
Yeah.
Fucking awesome.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's what happens, because like he gets pissed that they're eating Keanu at the beginning of the movie, and they're like, he's like, no, this is like my English tutor. Like, he's teaching me about English society. And they're like, well, what are we gonna eat? He just tosses him a baby.
Yeah, so cool. And then Keanu's like, whoa,
gross, man.
Oh, whoa. When they're drinking the absinthe, there's a lot of like very artsy camera shots, like of the label through the liquid, and at one point it says, you know, absinthe, and then it just says sin. Is absinthe. Oh,
I didn't notice that. That's like clever.
That. Nice little.
You know what's another thing
pun
I liked about this was also like the whole movie. Like, Dracula is trying to get to Mina. He wants to make her a vampire so they can live together forever. And then when the time comes to do it, like, she sees him and he's like, no, don't look at me, kind of thing. And then she's like, nah, it's all cool. I remember everything. And so he starts to go for it. He like bites her, and then he's like, no, like he kind of changes his mind.
Yeah. Even though she's already drunk the blood, but yeah.
Yeah. So it's a little interesting. I think it's interesting that you see him kind of regret it and realize, like, yeah, my life kind of sucks as a vampire, and now I'm selfishly making her do it. So I think that makes that turn at the end where he finds God, kind of realizing like, oh, maybe I'm not a good dude. Like, I was totally wronged at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do is pretty fucked up and morally repugnant.
Yeah, like narratively I understand it and I'm not opposed to it, but the way that it comes off in the movie to me feels very like it feels like Francis Ford Coppola is trying to say, turn to God. And I don't know if that was his intention, but it feels a little preachy to me.
It's like 2 movies back to back that we covered. War of the Worlds was very very
Right.
much like that. Like God in his infinite wisdom created disease.
Right. That
In
kind of
this.
stuff is a little abhorrent to me. Anathema.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Winona has that great line in the moment that you're talking about, where Dracula sort of changes his mind when he's changing her. She says, "Take me away from all this death." It's a good line.
It's a good line.
Yeah.
She delivered it.
Yeah, at least she got one good delivery in the movie. Ba-boom! No, she's wonderful.
She was totally fine in this movie. Like I don't think she's necessarily the best actress, but
It's
she
rough
can
when
rise to the occasion.
Yeah, it's rough when it's her and Keanu playing against Gary Oldman and Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah. But a lot of the times, like, having a lot of actors will say working with really good actors elevates you, and I think there's something to that. But that being said, God, what was it called? Destination Wedding, which is 99% just Keanu and Winona, and they're both just being snarky assholes. It's actually a really fun movie.
Okay, noted.
Yeah, you should watch it. It's actually really fun. But yeah, I don't have much to say. I definitely think, I mean, we talked about it earlier, that this is something that kind of gets a reimagining every 15 to 20 years. We're probably due for another big screen Dracula at some point.
And we just had that Dracula Untold. Oh, we didn't even talk about Dark Universe.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
I don't know how much there is to say there, but clearly they did not do a great job with that proposed franchise. But while I was watching the 1931 Dracula, I was thinking to myself, like, why don't they just give one of these movies? I think they tried to do this with Blumhouse, but like give one of these movies to like Robert Eggers or Ari Aster or somebody like that, and just let them do fucking gothic fucked up Dracula. And that's actually what the Francis Ford Coppola version ended up being. But I think you could do one now that is even more in line with something like Midsommar or The Lighthouse or something.
Yeah.
Like make an art house Dracula movie. That's what I want.
Yeah, I think we could go, like, obviously you just brought it up, they're trying to do the Dark Universe. I don't think that's going to really go anywhere anymore.
No, it's done.
But I think it could be interesting to go back and do like the Universal monster things that take place in the past. Like do another real, like they had I, Frankenstein with Aaron Eckhart like 10, 15 years ago. We don't need that, but I think it could be interesting to go and do another modern movie and do like, let's do an old Mary Shelley's Frankenstein again. Let's do, Dracula again. Because I do think when people talk to me about remakes and stuff, because people know I do this podcast, they're like, why do we need these? And I'm like, we were all kids, and most of us didn't, like we talked about at the beginning, most of us didn't like black and white movies when we were kids. Most people don't go back and watch movies more than 15, 20 years before they were born. Yeah. Most people don't. You and me, we're film people, so we do enjoy going back and watching these old movies, but most people don't. And I think that's why I don't think it's inappropriate for, like, even Disney. Like, everyone cries about the Disney remakes. Why did we need a live action Beauty and the Beast? The original one was fantastic. Absolutely, it's a fantastic movie, but why can't each generation have their own version?
You bond with the movies that you see when you're a kid.
Exactly.
People that are you and I, that are our age, like Michael Keaton's Batman is a very special thing, and Christian Bale was just good enough that it kept us with it. But like for people that are slightly older, Star Wars is a perfect example. Like people that are born in the 90s, those prequels are their Star Wars. They don't see anything
they like them.
wrong with them. Yeah, and maybe they see flaws in them, but they grew up with those movies and they have childhood memories attached to them, and those are their movies. So with these like properties that these characters that are so timeless, like Dracula and whatever else, I think it totally makes sense to remake these movies every 15 years. Like let somebody else take a crack at it, and let kids grow up with their own version of them. They're timeless characters, and they can be reinterpreted a bunch of different ways.
Well, and also like you as a filmmaker, I'm just a fan, but like there's things that you grow up as a fan and as a filmmaker, you might want to take your shot at it.
Yeah.
And
just to circle this back to the Godfather thing. I don't think that Godfather needs to be. I think Godfather's a product of its time, and if you remade it, it would probably still have to take place in the 70s, and then you'd just be like remaking the exact same thing. There's not. Yeah. I don't think there's a lot of interpretation there. But
that's fair.
Yeah, and that's why I think like something like Dracula makes more sense to remake.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I've got to say about this one. Let's bring it home. Tell us where our listeners can find you. Give us your plugs.
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Dyslexic, DYS Alex IC. I'm on Twitter at Palishi. I'm on TikTok at Palishi as well. And you can find all sorts of film and TV and elder emo type of shirts and merchandise at my Etsy store, Burn the Scene Boutique. You can search that on Etsy. Although we are on a little strike this week. Well, I guess it's going up on Friday, so the strike will be over. But Etsy's not taking care of its creators, so we're on vacation mode for the week.
Yeah, and I'm all for that. I was gonna buy. There's these like face masks that I really like. They're super comfy. And I was about to order them, and then I heard about it, and I was like, I'm just gonna wait a week.
Yeah,
because I lost one at Disneyland the other day, and I was like, damn it, I really like these masks, but
we appreciate the
wait.
support.
Yeah, I'm for it. Fuck big business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, you guys can find everything that's MDXpods related at MDXpods.com, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, all at MDXpods. You can check out our other show on the network, Ruin My Childhood. That's me and my wife, Katrina. We've been back for about 3 episodes now. Those come out every other Friday, the opposite Fridays of Remake Rewind. So we would love if you check that out. But thanks for listening. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/MDXpods. We're not striking there. So, give us your money and support the show. But in all seriousness, we do appreciate that. We're also on YouTube, so if you want to listen there, like and subscribe. And thanks for listening.
Thanks. Thank you for listening. I didn't even bust out my Dracula accent this whole time. You idiot.